Hi, Cori.
Hi, Chang. How are you?
I'm good. There's no attendance yet. Now it's resending the invitation because some of them got asked for the password, and we didn't set any password.
Okay, so we'll hope that continues, and if not, we'll record this so that students can come back and review this later on YouTube or another way. So we'll make sure that this gets uploaded. So hi, everybody. Today we'll be talking about testing timelines specifically in relation to a lot of new developments that have happened with COVID-19 and some changes in the admissions landscape and how that impacts you. Specifically, we have students who are at the end of grade 10. And we'll be looking at kind of what are some key things that we want to be paying attention to in your timeline, some big considerations to take into account. My name is Cori Marquis. I am the Director of Academic Programming here at Spark Prep. And let's take a look at what we will dive into today. So we will be first starting with looking at an application overview and testing in context of how admissions folks look at your whole application. We'll be taking a look at the SAT and ACT testing requirements and some changes that have taken place. We'll take a look at SAT-2 subject tests, their importance, the schools that require them, schools that don't, as well as how to navigate the timeline of that. We'll take a brief look at AP exams. And then we'll take a look at how to put all these pieces together and actually consider your timeline at the end of grade 10. We'll spend some time looking at some key takeaways. And then importantly, we will then have some time for Q&A. So first, some deep breaths. Spark Prep has very much been keeping its ear to the ground. As you are sitting here listening, what's important for you to know is we've been doing a lot of collecting from different resources, and we've been doing a lot of listening, talking to our colleagues in the admissions space in high schools and high school counselors and teachers, from students, obviously, from our students and other students. We are members of a lot of organizations like IACAC and NACAC. So we're really trying to understand the whole landscape so that we can distill this information for you. One of the primary things that has been true over any webinar we listen to, any discussions with our colleagues in college admissions, colleges are very much sending assurances. Nearly every college has released a statement like this. And what we might see is even this statement from Penn, I think is worth reading out loud, that schools and districts are making the best decisions they can at this moment in the interest of their students' health and educational experience. We respect and support the decisions schools are making and recognize these decisions are outside of the students' control. We expect students to make the most of educational opportunities available to them. So as you see, really the important thing that I want to highlight here is that they are recognizing that things are out of students' control and that they want students to only make the most of resources available to them. That'll be the big through line. Colleges are very much leading with flexibility, compassion, understanding, and are doing their best to try to make correct decisions. They're taking their time because they don't want to make the wrong decision. But importantly, colleges, especially in the next year or two, will very much be looking at applications and opportunities in context. More on that in just a second. So let's take a look at testing in context. So what I mean by this is testing in the context of your application as a whole. So if you've had any exposure to Spark Prep, you've seen this diagram, and this is a way that we like to visualize what some important aspects are within your application. American colleges and universities review applications holistically. And what that means is that there are not any cutoff scores, not any cutoff GPAs typically. And schools, by and large, spend a lot of time reading a student's whole application. That includes things like grades and transcripts, which are important. These are institutions of higher education, and so they're looking to how you performed in high school as an indicator of how you might do in college. They'll be looking at some of your test scores like SAT, ACT, SAT2 subject test perhaps, AP exams, IB exams, things like that. Then they'll be looking for, beyond your academics, they'll be looking for demonstrations of both leadership and character, as well as growth and values. Leadership and character we often can observe in your letters of recommendation that come from teachers and in your activities, the way you choose to spend your time outside of school, outside of the requirements of what you must do to graduate or for your classes or whatever. How you engage with yourself, your community, how you pursue your own curiosities and intellectual interests or support family or communities around you. And then growth and values. This is kind of the heart of the application itself, which is essays, which include personal statement and also supplements, which indicate typically things like some more information about extracurricular activities or communities you're involved in, or specifics of why that school might be a good fit for you. But the reason that I think this is important to come back to repeatedly is because, as you see, test scores have always been and continue to be one slice of this. For different schools, they kind of have different levels of significance, and certainly the higher your test score is, the more doors that leaves open for universities. More schools have, you'll be within a competitive range for more schools, and you'll be a more competitive applicant at those schools. But really importantly, test scores have always been just one part of this piece. And if there is ever anything that is weaker or missing from this collection, by and large, what that means is that these other pieces just weigh a little bit more and are more important in understanding you as an applicant. And what that means is that those other components should also be a little bit stronger if there's a piece of information that's missing. So let's take a look at SAT, ACT testing requirements and how those have changed this year. So first question is, what is actually happening with tests this year? So officially, with the SAT, they are aiming for, and they have announced officially that they're aiming for monthly traditional administration starting in August. By traditional, I mean in person. You go to a testing center, you sit down, it's a paper test. That is the goal of what they're aiming to do internationally. They're looking at an August 29th date, September 26th, October 3rd, November 4th, December 5th. What you'll notice, though, is that this is their typical testing schedule, with the exception of the addition of September 26th. That's the only added test date. They're aiming to contact students the week of May 26th to start registration, particularly those who had tests canceled from March, April, May. And really important to note, if testing disruptions are still widespread in the fall, the SAT has been very clear that they'll likely roll out an online testing option. We don't quite know what that looks like, but that would be, they're aiming for something that is at home and online. So for the ACT, what do we know? They are still slated in many places to have their June 12th and 13th and their July test dates. We will keep our ears open to see whether that will continue over the course of the next few weeks, whether those test dates will stand. But as of now, those test dates are still in play. Registration is coming up for, again, the June test date. That's when it's closing. Again, they have likely contacted you already if you had previously registered for a test. And if you hadn't, you're not behind. Importantly, the ACT has already gone online internationally. So you may have heard that the ACT has been a computer-based test now for some time. And they've gone through a couple cycles of a couple seasons of online testing. And so they're moving online domestically in the fall. What this means is that they already have online infrastructure set up. It might be a little bit easier for them to do that in home, maybe not, that's still unclear, but they similarly have announced that they will do their best to offer an online test. What you'll notice is that we had some really widespread disruption with testing dates. So there were a number of test dates that were canceled this spring. That impacted rising grade 12 students most, those who are applying into this upcoming cycle. So what that means is that registration priority for both the SAT and the ACT are going to be given to rising grade 12 students, especially first-time test taker, those who have not yet had a test, students with fee waivers, things like that. So the SAT and the ACT will prioritize students who need a test sitting before this current application cycle, which doesn't quite apply to you all. So how will new online tests be formatted, administered, evaluated if they move online, if we're not allowed to have in-person, if it's not safe from a public health perspective to continue to have in-person test dates in the summer and fall? What will that look like? In reality, we don't know. Each school is going to make its decision regarding how they're going to evaluate any test if the testing format is different. And we don't quite know whether the format would be the same and just administered online and at home, or if, like the APs, which we'll talk about, if the format will be quite different. So given that, what do we know now about how colleges are planning to use test scores, right? Assuming that we'll have some traditional test dates, assuming that most students will be able to sit at least once for the test. Many have turned test optional. We'll take a look at that more in just a second. Many more are likely to follow. Even for schools requiring testing still, less emphasis will be placed on scores by necessity. So let's take a look at this trend. What we see is that this is the growing list of test optional schools. So there are close to 1,200 that have already announced that they are moving towards test optional for this cycle or the next few. And test optional can mean a variety of different things. Test flexible is probably a better way to say that. But test optional means that for many schools, it means that they will accept an SAT or an ACT score, but that they're not requiring that for admissions, right? So if a student doesn't have a test or doesn't feel that the test is representative of their ability, then students can choose to not submit that as part of their application for specific schools. Really importantly, this is a list of 485 plus top-tier schools de-emphasizing SAT, ACT in this upcoming admissions cycle. Really importantly, we have schools of note like Williams College, Amherst College, Swarthmore, Bucknell, many, many more, Dickinson, DePaul, so Skidmore. And this list is growing. Importantly, many of these schools were already starting to consider test optional policies or test flexible policies prior to COVID-19. That has sped up tremendously, and there are more and more schools coming on every week to this list. So these are the national liberal arts colleges that have already announced that they are moving towards a test optional or test flexible policy this upcoming year. And importantly, these are national universities that are following the same trend. Of note, we have all the UCs, the University of California school system. We have University of Chicago, Cornell, and many, many more. Again, this is a growing list. And what this speaks to is the trend, right? The trend specifically for this year of de-emphasizing the SAT and the ACT as part of the admissions landscape. So a few caveats. First, some of these schools on this list and otherwise are test optional just for this upcoming cycle, or they're piloting test optional policies. So what that means is they might try it out this year. They might see how it goes in terms of whether they feel like that's representative. Many schools are trying out a 3-year test optional policy to see if that, if they're missing anything from their application picture of students. Many policies are applicable to both domestic and international students, but you must check the school-specific policy for any school on your list, right? So this is true, again, to see, are they test optional just for this upcoming cycle or for 2 or 3 cycles down the road? And is it applicable to a student who's in your specific position? Another important thing to note is that test scores might still be really important or required for consideration for financial aid. So if financial aid is something that you need, test scores might still be a pretty heavy consideration for you. However, this trend of de-emphasis is very real, particularly this year. Something that we get asked a lot is test optional a trap, right? Are schools saying that they're test optional when in reality they're just trying to trick you and see if you can be strong enough to actually find a way to take this test? And by and large, no, these policies are sincere. The thing we've heard repeatedly from admissions officers is that if they have moved to a policy of test optional, they mean that. If you feel like your test is reflective of your ability, send it. If you don't send it. If you didn't have an opportunity to take the test, you won't be penalized for that. So no, the policies are sincere, but do consider what choice is right for you. There are still valid reasons to take the test, and should you still prepare, well, this will be the subject of a couple additional things that we'll look at in just a moment and later on in the hour. But whether you're questioning to prepare, taking a look at your resources, your early school lists, your specific priorities. And if you can, yes, for you all, if you are ending grade 10 now or soon, very likely you will have an opportunity to take the test. And if you can, the likelihood is high that you'll have the opportunity, and you should, right? That is, again, making use of the opportunities you might have available to you. If you do not submit a test score, coming back to kind of like this holistic view, what that means is all other portions of your application will be all the more important, and you'll want to make sure that those are as excellent as possible. So for you all, grade 10, rising grade 11 students, there's some good news. Number one is that testing options will likely become much clearer as we move into the fall. We'll have a much clearer sense of testing format, testing dates, testing content, and you will have a better sense of like what you specifically are heading into. This I can't emphasize enough. You will not need to, and you might not be able to complete testing this fall. Testing timelines for younger students will likely move back by about 3 to 6 months. And this is globally, right? This is for all students. So if this is true for you, right, the fact that this might be true for you and is likely true for you doesn't mean that you are behind. This just means that the whole trend of timeline for all students in your grade has shifted. So you'll likely continue to test into spring of grade 11 and potentially grade 12. That is something that some students did anyway. Some students chose to do, some students needed to do anyway. This is just kind of emphasizing that timeline for most students in your cohort. So again, anticipate taking the test actually winter, spring of grade 11 is a safer bet after rising grade 12 students have had an opportunity to take it. And if you've already started preparing, right, for students who are, who've already started preparing in grade 10, consider putting aside your studying for a few months. Really be careful of burnout, right? We'll take a look at available testing dates and timelines in a second, but consider if you are not taking the test until next March, can you sustain your pace? Can you sustain your energy? Can you meaningfully continue to improve over the course of the next 10 months or a year? That's a long time to sustain interest, material studying for a particular test. So if you set your studying aside, invest time in other areas of your personal development. And if you choose to maintain your studying, be intentional. Make sure you're making good progress. Make sure that you are continuing to see improvement and that you're not plateauing and maintaining just for the sake of saying you're studying. Make sure there's actually meaningful improvement. And if you haven't started preparing, take a diagnostic test soon and compare with your target score. That'll help you start to work backwards to see actually when to start preparing based on anticipated and target test dates. So let's take a quick moment and look at SAT subject tests, right? So this is another category of testing. And what I want to share with you is a really interesting trend that we've seen over the past many years, and this is a decline of the requirement of SAT subject tests, SAT-2 subject tests. So many of the schools on this list used to require, and over the past number of years, over the past decade or two, we've started to see more and more schools move to either recommend, consider, or drop altogether. Some schools of note, again, Williams College, which is, and Tufts and Cornell here, those Caltech. So even some very, very, very excellent, very competitive schools in the nation are choosing to move to a dropping it altogether, right? Many of these schools are subject test blind, which means that they will not look at these test scores as part of your application. The schools in white and light gray, I guess, will consider, right? So if you submit them, they'll take a look at them, but they're not actually requiring. That's many of your UCs, Stanford, NYU, others. We have a handful of schools that do recommend. These are the light green. So you still have Penn, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Duke, Emory, Brown recommending. Georgetown is notorious for recommending and kind of expecting that students have a couple of subject tests. But very importantly, we see one dark green box. McGill, which is a school in Canada, is the only school in North America that is still requiring subject tests as part of their application program broadly. So this trend has been happening and has been expedited this year specifically. So again, we see this downward trend over the past 15 years, and even top engineering schools like Cornell, Harvey Mudd, MIT are now subject test blind. What they have found is that this isn't to penalize students who are taking it. This is just an acknowledgement that that these tests actually haven't been particularly predictive of success in college and particularly success in engineering programs. So rigorous coursework is way more predictive of success in college. Engineering programs are especially looking at the highest level math class that you were able to take. So if you were able to continue in math through high school and you were able to seek higher level and pre-calculus, calculus classes, that's the thing that they have found that is more predictive of success in their engineering programs. With that said, subject tests can still serve a function, right? The intention of them is to demonstrate mastery of a subject, right? To say that I have studied world history and I would like to now take a world history test beyond my academics to show that I really understand this, really love this, and I'm willing to invest time in this, right? So there's a potential to use these tests as tools to demonstrate mastery of a subject. They're potentially a differentiator for you, particularly for schools that don't require them, which is now nearly all. And so if they're not required, though, you want to be pretty careful. You only want to submit scores if they're excellent. This is one of the reasons why the subject tests have become quite skewed because students are really only submitting top scores. That is also true for you, though, that it is, if the school does not require, it is way better to only submit scores if they are excellent. What that typically means is in the 700 range, ideally 750 to 800. But can mastery be demonstrated in other ways? Absolutely. Are there ways that you can demonstrate interest in a subject in deeper or more unique ways? Are there additional courses that you could take, particularly now that we're in the world of many opportunities online, to take additional classes via Coursera or through local community colleges or universities? So there are other ways that might be deeper, more unique, more of a differentiator for you if you have particular subjects that you want to invest more time and effort into. And again, consider priorities and allocation of time. Are these tests really going to serve you? Only consider preparing for subject tests after you have a strong SAT, ACT score that you're happy with. This is now more true than ever. Subject tests are not going to be as important as SAT, ACT. Schools are sometimes still requiring SAT, ACT. Schools are not still requiring subject tests. So if you only have the opportunity to prepare for and meaningfully take one, subject tests do not need to be your priority, especially if you take a diagnostic test of that subject test. And if your score is starting pretty low, consider whether that's the best investment of your time to study to get it to a place where you're scoring in those upper score ranges. So if your diagnostic test is strong enough to warrant an investment of effort to get it into high score ranges, and if you have a very clear plan, clear test dates with SAT, ACT, or are done with your SAT, ACT, then by all means, these are absolutely a tool for you to study, prepare, potentially demonstrate some interest and mastery. Let's talk very briefly about AP exams. So AP exams are also administered by the College Board, and they've started this week. So if AP exams are relevant for you, you know that this is something that you're dealing with in the past couple of weeks. But I think AP exams are an interesting thing to pay attention to, because this is one way that testing agencies like the SAT and the ACT have gotten creative, have shifted, and some challenges that have come up in taking testing out of in-person format. And so just to give you an idea of what is happening, and if AP tests are a thing for you, then hopefully this is relevant and meaningful for you. So there have been some changes and challenges. The exam format is now only 45 minutes. It's at home, it's online, versus multi-hour exams per subject that acted more as a final, and they were done in person during these 2 weeks in May. Very importantly, these are significantly inconvenient testing times for time zones outside of the United States. Again, if you have tests coming up, you know this well. Additional challenges include unstable internet connections, loud home environments, testing glitches that have been reported in the first day or two of testing. So what that means is no need to stress context, context, context. Just like context has always been important in American university admissions, context will continue to be the most relevant thing in the next couple of years. So if you are registered for AP classes, if you were a boarding school student and now have transitioned to a different time zone and are studying at home and have had to take these, or if you were taking these as part of your particular school's curriculum, your school will have a secondary school report that should indicate some of the challenges that were met. Additionally, there will be room on your application for you to indicate what your circumstances were. So context is everything. You will not be observed. These scores both won't be looked at as they had been looked at in years previously, and they certainly won't be looked at as apples to apples for everybody, because there are so many factors that make these things actually very different from student to student. So AP exams will not be evaluated heavily, if at all. We can expect that they'll likely still observe them as part of your application process, but the level of the course rigor is most important. That has always been true. Your choice to take rigorous classes, your choice to take very difficult and very difficult courses and courses that challenge you has always been the most important. Now more than ever, that level of rigor, and particularly your grades before the pandemic and before the AP test, will be the most telling factor of how you handle that level of rigor. Each college will decide whether to award credit for passing scores on a college by college basis, so that likely will not be a blanket policy. If you do choose to take the exams, or if you've already done so in the past day or two, utilize College Board's course resources. Know that those do exist, especially if your school has minimized the information they're giving you. And start modifying your sleep schedule, especially if you have testing dates that are in another week or two. Consider bumping back your sleep schedule just by 15, 30 minutes every day, so that ideally you are preparing your body and your mind to be alert at the time of testing. And totally fine to not take AP exams this year, especially if they're causing undue stress. If you do not have a stable internet, if you're taking it in a closet, if you are if you have a loud home environment, if this is not worth your time, that is a valid choice, especially this year and next year. So how do all these things come together? Let's take a look at some testing dates and how those fit in then to our timeline. So here we see scheduled test dates for the SAT. Again, this is very subject to change based on the public health situation globally and per location, right? So these are the scheduled test dates. These may or may not happen, and we'll need to keep our eye on whether these test dates actually continue to happen as scheduled in the fall. Right now, as we noted, this is their typical testing schedule, right, with the addition of this September 26th date. And then next year in 21-22, we go back to August, October, December, March, and May. What you'll notice is that subject tests, there's this note of our SAT subject tests available. On the dates where they are available, you can only choose one. For instance, August 29th of 2020, you can either take the SAT 1 or SAT subject tests. So if you are a student who's planning on taking the SAT and SAT subject tests, these are the test dates that you have to work with likely through the end of next year, that you'll want to really be intentional about cobbling together to make sure that you're gearing up for specific test dates. Importantly, not all, even if subject test dates are available, not all subject tests are available on every subject test date. Convenient, I know. But for instance, world history has a couple of dates that they're not available. Foreign languages are typically outside of Spanish and French. Most other foreign languages are really only offered once yearly. So you'll want to pay attention to, if subject tests are on your radar, what you have over the course of the next year or so, what subjects you were planning on taking, when those are available, and how those fit in with the rest of your testing timeline. Then we see ACT, scheduled test dates. Again, we see June and July are still slated to happen. And then we have test dates in September, October, December. These handful of test dates will continue to be geared towards rising grade 12 students likely. And so really February of 2021 is the first date where rising grade 11 students and younger will have kind of a free-for-all in terms of being able to register with only their cohort of students. And traditionally we see test dates in February, April, June, July. You'll see these testing windows because the ACT is now online and is administered as a computer-based test. They are administered over weekends with a couple of different testing windows, which means they're ostensibly able to accommodate different configurations of students. This might put them in a better position to like safely separate students and have students keep distance, not fill up testing environments in the same way. Online testing also allows scores to come back a little bit more quickly. So timeline option 1, grade 10 summer. So for many students, their school timeline has been pushed back, meaning there won't be a traditional summer break in the way that we may have had in the past. So for many of you, grade 10 will continue through the next month or two, meaning that will continue to be the priority, your academics. Personal development projects for things that you're personally interested in and want to pursue, different extracurricular activities. Potentially taking a diagnostic test of an SAT, ACT, choosing a test, and either starting prep or continuing prep if this is something you have done. Grade 11 fall, your grade 11 will begin, and you'll aim for your first official sitting. Assume that at most you'll be able to sit one time in the fall. Grade 11 winter spring, assume another couple of official sittings, right? Most students take the test 2 to 3 times. So SAT, again, we're looking at the March and May dates. ACT, we're looking at February, April, and/or June test dates. Grade 11 summer, you'll move into college applications and essay writing as a priority, personal development projects, and potentially studying for SAT 2 subject tests, if that's relevant for you. And then in the fall, grade 12 will begin. You'll potentially take SAT 2 subject tests in August, potentially October. October will be the last date for testing where you're able to see your results, usually before your early decision and early application deadlines, which are typically around November 1st, November 15th for most schools. Your regular decision deadlines for college applications are usually around January 1st. So this is one option. The big caveat, as we've talked about, is that there's a lot of uncertainty around this upcoming fall, right? So if you're choosing to like move forward full steam ahead, you just need to know that there is a lot of uncertainty still, and that it's a little bit of a risk to assume that you can take a test officially this fall. You might be able to, fingers crossed that we'll have students be able to take this, but there is some risk there, and you'll need to be prepared to shuffle your timeline if things get moved around, or if you're not able to get a testing date. Timeline option 2. End of grade 10 summer, again, continuing to finish grade 10. And instead of moving into testing, prioritize personal development projects, right? Shift your focus to other things. Grade 11 fall, grade 11 will begin. Then you can start to take a diagnostic test of an SAT or an ACT, choose a test, start your preparation, bypass the fall as potential testing dates, and assume that your official sittings will come in March, May, and August, or February, April, and June for the ACT. Grade 11 summer, still college applications and essay writing should be the priority. Still personal development projects should be the priority, potentially studying for subject tests. And in grade 12 fall, potentially retaking SAT, ACT if needed, or and/or doing SAT 2 subject tests. So what you'll notice is this option 2 is bumping back the start of test preparation really until this fall of grade 11, so that you are bypassing a bit of the uncertainty, right? By fall, we should have a better sense of what your testing options are, and you can plan accordingly. In terms of when to actually begin prep, if you're aiming, for instance, for a March test date, this is a question we get, is like, how long should I prepare, right? We typically recommend, we have like 3 levels of courses. Each of those courses are between 8 and 10 weeks. And what that means is What that means is that by and large, most of our students study between 2 and 4 months for a given test. Longer than that is a little bit hard to maintain momentum, interest, and again, continue to grow. Shorter than that is a little bit hard to give yourself time to absorb content and make meaningful progress. So if you know that your diagnostic score is quite far from where you want to be and you're aiming for a March test, maybe starting in October, November, maybe even September is a good scenario for you. If you're aiming for a March test and you're pretty close to your target score, maybe even starting in December or January will give you a good amount of momentum, urgency, and consolidated amount of time to make some meaningful progress. So what are our key takeaways? First of all, as we started with, deep breaths all around. Colleges are very much leading with flexibility and compassion. Prioritize SAT or ACT over SAT2 subject tests. That should be your priority if you're able to take any tests at all. SAT and ACT will continue to be given less emphasis for at least this admission cycle, probably the next admission cycle or two, whether a school goes test optional or not. So there are valid reasons to choose not to continue to prep for the SAT or ACT, but if you can prepare to take an SAT or ACT at least once, which most of you should have the opportunity to do, you should have the opportunity to do so. Context will be key across the board. If you only have 1 or 2 chances to take an official sitting, right? If you have fewer sittings, colleges will know that. Colleges understand that students in these couple of years will not have the same opportunity to take many sittings as previous peers have done in the past, which is why they are being de-emphasized. Take advantage of resources available to you, but you will not be penalized for resources you do not have access to. And I think by and large, one of the important takeaways is to use this as an opportunity to make choices about what you can and want to prioritize. You can make a case for why those choices made sense for you. If you have an internet connection, now more than ever, the world is your oyster to engage in classes, communities. Screen burnout is a thing, but there are many resources available to you. If you're interested in studying economics and taking classes that are offered at Harvard and Stanford and other top schools, these things are available to you. And I encourage you to take advantage of things that pique your curiosity. Engage with your community, your intellect, your world, yourself. And really use this as an opportunity for some soul searching rather than the checkbox syndrome of productivity theater, right? Doing things, there aren't the same opportunities to fill your resume in the same way that maybe students have in the past. And that is potentially a benefit for you. What do you actually care about? What were you hoping to get out of that summer program? And use that as a way to redirect your attention and interest. There also will continue to be a dramatic amount of uncertainty as the situation continues to evolve. Stay tuned for changes and information about the SAT, ACT, and colleges. Colleges are trying to be very proactive in communication. And as colleges are trying to lead with compassion for the changes that you all are experiencing, I'm inviting a lot of our students to also lead with compassion and understand that all of these organizations, colleges, are really making the best decisions that they can at the time. Great, so thank you. We are now going to leave just a few minutes for some question and answer so I can potentially answer some of your individual questions. And it looks like we have one coming up. When submitting SAT to schools, will they see my previous scores and how many times I took it, or they just would see whichever one I want to submit? Great. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. So this has always been true that each college has their own testing policy, right? And that again will continue to be true. Some schools require or recommend that you submit all test dates and all test sittings. Other schools really only care and want to look at your highest single sitting. Other schools do something called super score, where they'll say, send us your top scores from any given subsection. So if you did better on verbal one test and math on another, send us both and we'll combine those and super score for you. So that really depends on what the specific school's testing policy is in terms of whether you should submit all or just one test to them. What I do like to emphasize for students is that students do have control over which tests they do send. And that's true for both the SAT and the ACT. You do have to send an official score report. So the College Board and the ACT will never send anything without your permission. So you have to consent and pay to send tests to schools. But you'll want to take a look at, if you have a preliminary school list, you might want to just take a look at what their testing policies are, especially now many of those things are changing. And many schools might be asking for all your sittings, right? That'll give them a sense of whether you had the opportunity to take it once or multiple times. And other schools might just be asking for your single highest sitting. Thanks, Lane. Any other questions? We'll have our team kind of compile, and we'll see what comes down the pipe. Great. So another question is, are the ACT tests available to be taken online during fall 2020? As of now, yes. So as of now, it is still their plan to offer online testing, but specifically it's not online at home, it's online at a testing center is the way that the ACT has organized their testing. As far as I know, that is still what they are aiming for. So back to a question about testing timeline. So for 10th graders, this means we still have 2 more years. And by that time, this pandemic will have settled. SAT will likely to happen as normal. So again, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Many rising grade 11 students are ready to take testing and finish testing grade 11, then they shift to subject tests, and that is not really possible for even students who are ending grade 10 now. So yes, there's about a year and a half between now and the time that grade 10 students will need to submit their applications, but keep in mind, October of grade 12 is really your last viable test to submit for any early application, early decision schools, and it's not that realistic to assume that you'll have many, if any, testing opportunities now through December. So that means that you really have from January of 2021 through October of 2021 to complete all your testing. There will likely be a lot of demand for tests. So again, because there's a lot of uncertainty around testing availability, testing dates, whether testing will happen in person, whether they'll change the testing. Hopefully, Hangling, we will see testing and a lot of things go back to normal, but because that's still uncertain right now, we're telling students to prepare to take it fewer times than they might expect otherwise, and that colleges will observe that and will know that they didn't quite have the same opportunity to take it as many times as maybe in years prior. There's another question that is, what are the best online web and sources to learn from for the SAT? And what advice would you give to a beginner, a 10th grade just starting to learn the SAT? So in terms of online resources, there are many. Khan Academy has partnered with the College Board. They have a lot of wonderful free resources for students. There are, as much as possible, aim for official resources, right? Resources that are actually published by the College Board or in association with the College Board or ACT. So official materials are the best materials. But there are a lot of really wonderful materials from other programs, other test prep companies, other books. And prep can look like anything. It can look like picking up a book and following through and doing kind of your own study program. It might look like joining a class at a testing center. We have classes. There are a lot of other testing centers that have group SAT or ACT classes. And potentially, another big thing is doing a lot of mock tests. The big thing is familiarity and exposure. Give yourself a mock test and see how it goes, right? And give yourself a starting point. That is knowledge and understanding is the best way to start approaching those things. Another big tip that I would say is always focus on once you take a set of 10 questions or a whole test, go through and do a pretty relentless error analysis. Why'd you get that wrong? Did you misread the question? Do you need some brush up on content? If so, go and brush up on that content. Remind yourself how to deal with quadratics, or remind yourself that grammar rule or those punctuation rules around commas, whatever those things might be that you're getting wrong. The other thing, just approaching these tests with an orientation that they are standardized, meaning there's always exactly one right answer. And so your job in studying is to find the patterns. Why are these questions definitely correct and all these other answer choices are definitely wrong, right? So approaching it with a little bit of curiosity, with play, and just with exposure, give yourself some regularity and start with a mock test is the place to start. Great. Let's take a look at, let me see, we might have time for one more question. So there's a question around financial aid for international students and what that means, what's happening now. That is a big question mark, I think, for both universities as well as for international students. Not all schools offer financial aid to international students, so you want to be, in your research, if that's something that you need, you want to be particularly clear on which schools research, which schools actually do and don't offer financial aid. This year, I think you all have the benefit of seeing how this year goes for students, and we'll have a much better sense after this year of whether schools have funding, how much funding, if it's affected at all by the pandemic. My instinct says that it will be affected. In which direction and kind of how dramatically, we're not sure. And I think that'll depend on a given school. So thank you all. We'll go ahead and pause there for the sake of time. I'd like to also just remind you all that there will be a short survey, and please take that. That gives us a lot of feedback and lets us know what worked for you, what was useful for you, what content you want to see in the future. Also, Zoe is one of our team members, and she is available for one-on-one consultations. We strongly encourage you to sign up for a consultation. She has a lot of information that she can share with you, and in a way that's more specific. You can have opportunities to ask a lot more of your specific questions. So please, again, help us improve future webinars by filling out our very short survey and sign up for a consultation. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I hope that answered some of your questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know how else we can help and support and answer your questions in the weeks and months to come. Thanks all.